I'm going, I exclaimed. Go away and don't come back, replied my wife. Normally, on my way out the door, I would reply, screw you. But today, I didn't want my last words to her to be so uncivilized. In our 14 years of marriage, we had many exchanges, but I've always come back. But not this time. A few days later, she realized what I meant this time. Over the past 6, 7 months, Jenna, my wife, had become more and more verbally abusive to me. I didn't realize what was going on. Her snide remarks were sarcastic to say the least. I began to avoid her as much as possible so as not to make matters worse. Each day, I lingered longer and longer at the car. Sometimes I even came home after Jenna and Carrie, our 13-year-old daughter, had dinner. I had to get my own food. Sometimes there were leftovers, but lately I think they ended up in the trash before I even got home. My name is Kurt Kaminsky. Technically, my name is David Kurt Kaminsky, but my dad's name is also David, so they started calling me Kurt from the beginning, so there would be no confusion. No, I'm not a junior in high school. My dad's name is David John Kaminsky. Why he didn't make me a junior is beyond me. I would have been happy to be called Junior or even DJ, but no, I was called either Kurt or DK, and DK just doesn't sound right. Yes, I am Polish, or rather an American of Polish descent. Yes, I've heard all the jokes. Well, maybe not all of them. They seem to come up with new ones every year. I've heard relatively innocuous ones like, you know why Poles spell their name with ASCII on the end? Because they don't know how to spell Sani. To the more offensive, do you know why Polish and Polish are spelled the same way? Because they don't know the difference between shit and shinola. And of course, I've heard worse statements, which I won't repeat here. Being the only person of Polish descent I know, not counting my father, living in this small town of about 10,000 people, I have been the subject of many such jokes. Technically, I'm only half Polish, the other half, on my mom's side, being German, French, Irish, and English mixed into one. But since my last name is Kaminsky, I'm Polish. But I digress. Let's get back to the current issue. My wife, who will soon be my separatrix, turned out not to be who I thought she was. I only found this out 4 weeks ago. As I said, I had been spending more and more time away from my wife because of her abusive attitude. After coming home several times without dinner, one Monday night I decided to grab a bite to eat at one of the local restaurants. I was sitting in a booth and was about ready to order when I suddenly heard a conversation between two guys in a booth on the other side of the partition. My attention was caught by a phrase that included the word Pole. I listened and heard one of the men say, "So you've been having fun with the Pole's wife for a long time?" Even before they were married. I entertained her on their wedding day, and he didn't know anything. I didn't recognize the first guy's voice, but I recognized the second guy. It was my best friend, George Curry. I sat there stunned. I know they kept talking, but I didn't hear anything else until I heard George say, "Yes, we get together and have sex at least twice a month. Kurt is so busy in the parking lot he doesn't even know what's going on." Again, doesn't know. At that moment, the waitress came over to take my order, and I said quietly, "Excuse me, I have to go." I left, heading away from their booth so they wouldn't notice me. I couldn't believe it. My wife, Jenna, with my best friend. He was even the best man at my wedding. He's also my mechanic, and will be for a while. Actually, he's not really my mechanic because he's officially an independent contractor that I use exclusively to repair and inspect all of my cars. If you haven't already guessed, I own a used car store. Yes, I'm a used car salesman. I've heard all the jokes and insults too. However, my business is very good. People know they are getting a great car at a good price. They also know that I am responsible for my cars. If there are problems, I fix them. George has always been a good mechanic. I keep him busy and pay him well. I wanted to hire him, but he said he wouldn't respect himself if he had a Pole in charge. He said it in jest, but I knew he meant it. Despite this, I hired him as an independent mechanical contractor. But he wasn't very independent. In fact, I was his only source of income. That fact would be his undoing. I left the restaurant and drove around the neighborhood. Could it be true? I asked myself. Or was he just blowing smoke? I could hire a private investigator, but if what he said was true, they only met twice a month. That might turn out to be a waste of money. However, what I could do was check her phone and email. That's what I decided to do. I got home, and Jenna was as moody as ever. That was fine with me. I didn't want to talk to her until I knew the truth. After she fell asleep on her side of the bed, I got up and checked her email. There was nothing suspicious there. Her phone was password protected, but it didn't take me long to determine that our daughter's birth date was a code. I saw a few messages that could be taken the wrong way if I wanted to, but none from George. His name was on our contact list, but then again, he was my best friend, so that wasn't unusual. Maybe he was just babbling nonstop, I thought. However, her behavior lately made me think something was going on with her. Maybe not with George, but with someone else. I got into bed and started to toss and turn, trying to fall asleep. It was somewhere around 2:43 because that's what time it was on the clock when I last looked at it. The next day, George showed up at the car dealership and made a Polish joke. This happened to him quite often, but I usually laughed a little and left it at that. Today, however, I lashed out at him. George, what the hell do you know about Poland? I bet if I laid out a map of the world, you couldn't even point it out. You joke like all Poles are dumb, but I bet they could point out the United States and even our state on a map. Why don't you get to the point? George looked at me and didn't know what to say. He knew I was right, but he couldn't point out Poland if his life depended on it. George had never been noted for his bookish knowledge. He was good-looking, he had street smarts, he knew a lot about motors, but he never went to college. That's probably why he hung around me in high school. I helped him with his homework so he could at least finish school. Now I was starting to reconsider my choice of friends, and he was making me reconsider my choice of wife. I went to my office, closed the door, and began to ponder how I could get evidence of what might be going on. I couldn't meet them face to face. They would just deny everything. I needed proof. I called a private investigator in Santa Fe. I told him my concerns. He said, considering this only happens twice a month, it would be too expensive to keep track of them. You could put a tracker on your wife's cell phone. At least you will know where her phone is whenever you check it. You could also install cameras in the house, but unless you buy really good cameras, and by good I mean expensive, they will probably be found. Even if you buy expensive cameras, if your wife doesn't notice the people around her, she will probably notice something else. I think if I were you, I would install a tracker on her phone and hope to catch them at a motel or something. I recommended the tracking software and told him I'd send him a check for his help. I didn't do anything. You don't owe me anything. He said, all the information I gave you could have been obtained on the internet. Well, I reached out to you for an estimate and you gave me good information, so expect a check in the mail. If you're ever in Silver City, stop by Kaminsky's car dealership and tell him I said hi. I'm not usually in this part of the state, but if I am, I'll be sure to look you up. He said, and I realized he meant it. Part of the reason I was successful at selling cars was because I made people feel important. I realized early on that people needed to feel like they mattered and that what they did mattered. I looked at tracking software and decided I could do at least that. Then I looked at the camera and realized he was right. It saved me money, time, and the embarrassment of buying cameras that I had no doubt Jenna would notice. That night, when everyone had gone to bed, I got up, downloaded the tracking app on her phone, and synced it to my phone. It would run in the background without her knowing. I slept better that night. The next day at work, I checked the app periodically. She worked part-time at the university bookstore. She only worked 20 hours a week. The money she received she called mad money and spent it on whatever she wanted, usually going to the salon. Later, I would check to see if she was at the grocery store. And even later, she was home. George had been in and out most of the day, but when Jenna was home, he was at work. So at least that day, I was sure nothing had happened. In the evening, I decided to try to be nicer to my wife and daughter. When I asked if they wanted to go out to eat at Revel Restaurant, the wife seemed to respond a little better. However, Carrie was a typical 13-year-old girl, unsure if she wanted to see her parents. I insisted, and she reluctantly headed to the car. Dinner was enjoyable. I made sure to mention George in the conversation and Jenna averted her eyes, but quickly changed the subject when she saw me looking at her, which heightened my suspicions. I wanted to know if what George was saying was true. I had to find out somehow. That night, I didn't bother to check her cell phone. I couldn't check her calls or texts, so either she deleted them immediately or didn't do it at all. As I got into bed, I said to Jenna, Thanks for agreeing to dinner tonight. Thanks, Kurt. It was a nice surprise. She looked at me and said, maybe you'll get lucky tonight. It had been a while, but like I said, we hadn't been getting along much lately. Jenna finished her nightly preparations in the bathroom and got into bed, snuggled up against me. I had mixed feelings about possibly having sex with her. If she's cheating on me, do I want that? I decided that until I had proof, let her initiate and reciprocate on her own. I didn't take the initiative. We eventually had sex, but it was very vanilla and not worth going into detail about. Oh well, at least I enjoyed it. The rest of the week I checked the location of her phone and found nothing out of the ordinary. Saturday night, when she was already asleep, I checked her phone for messages or calls and again found nothing. I was almost to the point of convincing myself that George was lying through his teeth, trying to impress some guy with his sexual exploits. It wasn't the first time this had happened. I'd known it since high school. I went back to bed and started to toss and turn again. My subconscious was keeping me awake. It was 2 in the morning and I was lying there staring at the ceiling, unable to fall asleep. So I got up and went downstairs to get something to drink. Hopefully it would help me sleep. I sat there holding a glass of Jack Daniels and Coke in one hand and her phone in the other. I decided to check her phone again. I entered my password, my daughter's birth date, and opened the phone to the home page. And then it hit me. Our daughter's birth date was key. Our daughter's pregnancy had been difficult. We had thought several times that we would lose her during the pregnancy. Something about her rhesus didn't match my wife's. It felt like my wife's body was fighting the baby inside her. My wife was on bed rest for the last 3 weeks of her pregnancy so that she could carry the baby to term. She did indeed carry her to term, and exactly 9 months later on our wedding day, Carrie was born. We were so happy. She was healthy, but she was hard to handle. She cried constantly, didn't get enough sleep, didn't want to be put on Jenna's breast, and most of all, she was hard to handle. My wife, in Carrie's second year, bluntly told me that we're not having another baby. It depressed me, but honestly, the baby was sucking all the joy out of our lives. I mentioned that she turned 9 months old. These babies are called wedding night babies because they are conceived that night or during the honeymoon. A light went on in my head. If what George said was true, there was a good chance that Jenna was already pregnant before our wedding night. Jenna was on the pill. No, we didn't wait until we were married to have sex. In fact, it was a big part of our time together. The doctor, when asked how Jenna got pregnant, said that the stress of the wedding probably affected her hormones and made the pill ineffective. Well, if it was ineffective that night, then it was ineffective that day as well. Now I knew what I had to do. There was a 50% chance I wasn't the father. You know the expression, the early bird gets the worm. Well, George could have been an early bird, but in his case, I think the expression should be, the early bird gets the worm. I got out of bed and went to the bathroom, found some cotton swabs and went to Carrie's room. She was sound asleep now. By the time she was 4, she had finally come to a normal sleep schedule. Until then, she had had a hard time. She'd lie there snoring with her mouth open. I'd just take a cotton swab and run it along the inside of her cheek. She didn't even wake up. I put it in a plastic zipper lock bag and repeated the process for myself. If it turns out that Carrie is my biological daughter, I'll be left with questions about Jenna's fidelity. If, however, Carrie is genetically not mine, that's where the real shit would start. Sunday was chores day, and we each had our own things to do. I took my time socializing with them, limiting my attention to Jenna and Carrie. I was having a hard time keeping my emotions in check, so I didn't want to give anything away. I was anxious to know the results of my suspicions, but I doubted it. This question had been bugging me all day. Jenna asked me, "Is something bothering you, Kurt?" I had to think of something quickly, so I said, "I want to buy a large number of cars at the next auction to fill my lot. That means money will be tight until I can make a few sales to make up for it." "Well, don't overwork us," she declared. She always said we when talking about the business, and it was probably a good thing she thought of it as ours, but the truth is, when I opened the parking lot, I incorporated the company to limit my liability. We live in a litigious society, and I didn't want anything done in business to negatively affect my personal life. I think I'm going to pay off all my credit cards and cancel all but one, so our credit history will look a lot better, I told her. It was a ploy to explain my plans to her to prevent any possibility of her screwing me over financially if she found out about my plans. As you see fit, she replied nonchalantly. The idea came to me at the worst possible moment. It's amazing how your mind can work if you let it. It will limit the possible consequences if what I expected turns out to be true. So, early Monday morning, I took my samples to Western New Mexico University and talked to someone in the science department. They referred me to the head of the department. He told me that they had a program in cell and molecular biology and that they would be happy to take it on. I gave him some of my business cards and told him that he or someone who would work with the samples would get a 10% discount on the purchase. He seemed to appreciate that and said, I'm thinking of swapping my Camry for a newer car. I may have to stop by your place and see the range. If you don't find anything you like, just let me know and I'll work with you to find something you like, I told him. Thanks, I will, he replied. I know I smiled as I drove out of the university, but it was a concerned smile. The results could have been the end of my marriage. When I told Jenna about buying new cars to add to my fleet, I just hid my concerned expression. Now I thought that's not a bad idea. I called Paul, my accountant, loan officer, and part-time salesman, into my office and told him about my idea. We can make this work, he said. Paul, there's something else I'd like to do. I'd like to pay off the mortgage on my house. Can we arrange a lump sum payment so I can do that? Let me look at the financials and get back to you this afternoon. As he left my office, I thought about calling my attorney and asking for a referral to a family lawyer. But then I thought, you may be in a hurry. Let's see what the results are first. After all, I hadn't yet found any evidence that my wife was having an affair. In the afternoon, Paul showed me the spreadsheet and we discussed the next steps for both of my plans. The next 2 days were some of the longest. I was on standby, waiting for the results of the DNA tests. Late Wednesday night, I received a call from the department head. He was on his way over with the results and to inspect the car. When he arrived, I directed him directly to my office. He looked at me, and from the look on his face, I could tell from the look on his face what the results were. Then he spoke up and confirmed it. The two samples taken are unrelated. I nodded my head, and he realized that, although I had expected it, the news shocked me. He gave me a moment to think and held out the envelope with the results. I looked up at him, my expression changed, and I asked, So which car were you thinking of? I know this is going to sound corny, but I just turned 50 and I'm looking for a sports car. I was thinking about a Mazda Miata. I told him I didn't have such a car, but I was going to the auction the next day and would try to find one that was okay both mechanically and cosmetically. I'll call him this afternoon and let him know what I've been able to find. As he was leaving, I told Anna, my secretary, scheduler, office manager, part-time salesperson, that I'll leave early, but if you need me, I'm only a phone call away. I knew she wouldn't call. She rarely needed me. She could handle almost anything that needed to be done. I drove around the city just looking. Oddly enough, things looked different. I called my attorney. He was saddened by the news, but referred me to another attorney who he knew would do the right thing. I called and made an appointment for late the next evening. I grabbed a bite to eat at a restaurant, and as I ate, I reflected on what had happened. Had I really wasted the last 15 years of my life? I couldn't even say I had a child from this marriage. Sure, I still considered her my child to some extent, but biologically she was not. What was I supposed to do next? I realized that I couldn't act like I didn't know anything. Sure, I had been ignorant before, but now that I knew, there was no turning back. One thing I knew for sure, George would pay. I didn't care that he had been my best friend for years. With friends like him, I could use enemies. Jenna would pay too. I wonder if she knew Carrie wasn't mine. Even if she didn't, she'd kept that secret from me. The secret of her wedding day sex with my best man, my best friend. Now I had no reason not to believe what I overheard. She was having sex with him at least twice a month. I was starting to get angry, and before I got out of control, I needed to be alone, away from everyone. I needed to call Jenna and tell her I wouldn't be home that night. I couldn't go home. I would probably do something that I would go to jail for. She answered the phone. Hey, Kurt. Hi, I'm going to spend the night in Albuquerque so I can be ready for the auction at 8 o'clock, I said in an emotionless tone. Oh, okay. Have a safe trip, she said. I don't usually go to Albuquerque for an auction, so this was unusual. I wondered if she'd take advantage of the fact that I'd been gone all night. She'd have to blame Carrie on my parents, and that would be hard to explain. I would, however, glance at her phone tracker periodically throughout the evening to see if she decided to go somewhere else. I hit the roads all the way to Albuquerque. I wanted to buy at least 20 cars, including a Mazda Miata. After the auction ended, I would arrange to have them picked up or shipped back to my lot. The question swirling around in my mind was, who should I have do the mechanical inspection? I knew George wouldn't get any more work from me after the routine inspections and repairs were done. When he finds out that I bought 24 cars, dollar signs will appear in his eyes and he'll realize how much he can charge me for all that work. However, that won't happen, and I'll keep it a secret until the last minute. I will need to talk to one of the local dealers at the auction to see who is good enough and trustworthy enough to inspect them before shipping them to our little town. I arrived in Albuquerque around 9 o'clock and got a room at the Best Western Hotel. Even though I was the owner, I couldn't justify having to pay the company's bill for an expensive hotel. The room was comfortable, as was the bed. It had everything I needed. I am a simple man with simple needs. Upon entering the house, I immediately checked Jenna's cell phone. Turns out she was still home, or at least her phone was still there. That night I had a hard time sleeping. I kept going over in my mind why she did what she did. How could she justify having sex with him on our wedding day, let alone doing it with him twice a month for who knows how many years? I began to reevaluate our marriage. It was never perfect, but I thought we loved each other. I realize now that this was a delusion from the beginning. The first few years after we were married, things were not easy. Of course, we weren't expecting a baby right away. Initially, we planned to wait 3-4 years and only then to start a family. We agreed on 3 children even before the wedding. However, a fight with Carrie ruined those plans. And when I found out that it was my best friend who ruined those plans, the whole struggle seemed useless to me. 14 years of wasted effort. Sure, there had been good times, but even those were now overshadowed by this news and the possibility that they could have been bloody throughout our marriage. If Jenna hadn't been having fun with George, maybe she would have gotten pregnant with me, and maybe she wouldn't have had such a bad pregnancy and a difficult child that made her want no more. George ruined my life when he had sex with my future wife on my wedding day. Now he entertains her at least twice a month and, I'm sure, laughs at ignorant Pole the whole time. He must pay. I thought as I lay down and tried to sleep. I was furious again. I needed to calm down or I wouldn't be able to sleep. I turned on the TV to some mindless comedy program. The laughter helped calm me down, and by 11 o'clock I was ready to fall asleep in anticipation of a long day. The auction went great. I bought some great cars at great prices and met several dealers from Albuquerque. I didn't see any Miatas at the auction, so I started asking around to other dealers. 2 of them had these cars, one red and one black. I asked them if they would be willing to make a deal when I found out which color my buyer preferred. Sure, they replied. Just let me know which cars you have on the lot and we'll make it happen. I should have been at this auction more often. Networking with other businessmen and businesswomen in the same field inspired me to expand my business. It also took my mind off my problems. After lunch, when I met with my lawyer, the news was not good. I would lose half of everything and would have to pay child support and alimony. Child support for a child that wasn't even mine. I decided then that I would not get a divorce. Instead, I would leave her with George's child. I would pay the mortgage on the house. She could stay in it, but my name would be the only name on the deeds, so she couldn't sell it. If I left but continued to pay taxes and utilities, she couldn't file a quitclaim deed and take the house. Really, I had to decide what to do with my business. It was organized as a corporation, but somehow I knew that if I didn't do something to protect it, I could lose it. I would have to talk to my business lawyer about it. When I walked in the door of my house, I was exhausted from the long day, so I told Jenna, "I'm tired. I'm going to take a shower and go straight to bed." And I headed for the bedroom. "Do you want some dinner?" She turned to me. "No, I had a late dinner," replied I. At least she thought to ask. The shower was lovely. My problems seemed to almost melt away. I had problems, but I was on my way to solving them. I fell asleep within minutes of my head being on the pillow. I had been stressed out for the past week, and now that I had started to make a plan of action, my mind could rest. I woke up early, refreshed, and headed to the office before Jenna and Carrie even woke up. I had things to do and plans to make. When the employees started arriving, I found myself knee-deep in spreadsheets, financial reports, and sales projections. I informed Paul that I had purchased 23 vehicles and that we would be closing a deal with a dealer in Albuquerque within the week. I asked Anna not to assign George any more work and to keep it all a secret. She looked at me with a perplexed expression and said, "You're the boss." "Thank you, Anna. You are irreplaceable." When 9 o'clock came, I called my business lawyer and asked what I should do. "Well, your business is registered, but there may still be a way she can get you to sell it to get half of its value. Have you thought about selling it beforehand?" "No, do I need to?" "It would keep the business out of her hands," he said. "This business is my life, I can't get rid of it," I told him. "Okay, give me time to think about it and do a little research. I'll call you at the end of the week." This news was crushing. I had worked hard to build my business into what it was today. This is my baby, unlike Carrie, I thought to myself. Now I was gripped by rage again. Part of being a good business person is the ability to compartmentalize and multitask. I needed to put my personal problems aside and get back to business. The first thing I did was call Doug, the department head, who had determined that everything George had said was true. "Doug, Kurt Kaminsky, I have information on two Miats you might be interested in. One is red, the other black. Are you still considering them?" "I'll consider them if the price is right," he said. "Which color are you interested in? I'll bring it here so you can look at it and then we'll discuss numbers. Even if we can't agree on a price, I'm sure I can sell it without too much trouble." "What color would you suggest?" he asked. Every color has its pros and cons. Fire engine red is an eye-catching color, but it fades faster. Black looks elegant, but it heats up quickly in our climate. Let me ask you, will this truck be stored in your garage when you're not using it? Yes, I can do that. Then the red color won't be in the sun a lot, so fading won't be an issue. I'd choose it unless you think you'd prefer the black color. The red color sounds great. How soon can I see it? Would Monday or Tuesday work for you? Sure, call me when you get it. I will. I hung up and called the dealer who had the red one to arrange an exchange. He was interested in the BMW in my parking lot. It had been parked there for 3 months, and he'd have a better chance of selling it in the big city. By this time, George had pulled up. He had several cars that still needed repairs. Being an independent contractor, he could come and go as he pleased, and as long as the work was done when I needed the car, I was fine with it. He overheard several salesmen talking about the 23 cars that were soon to be in our warehouse. He looked into my office and said, "Hey Kurt, when are these cars coming in from the auction? I want to make sure I have a schedule to get them done in time for you." "The auction house will arrange for them to be delivered here. That will happen late next week or early the following week," I told him. It was hard for me to speak calmly to him, that damn traitor. "Okay, I'll contact Anna and ask her to put me on the schedule," he said. I only grinned to myself as he walked away. That weekend, I did my best to stay away from Jenna. I did yard work and ran a lot of errands. I didn't even bother checking her phone tracker. It didn't matter to me anymore. I felt nothing but contempt for her. The fact that I was raising someone else's child was unforgivable. On Monday, I was back at the car dealership. I called the dealer in Albuquerque and told him I would come to Beamer and pick up the Miata. He said, "Great, we'll have a late lunch when you get there." It was a beautiful day for a drive, and I informed Anna that I would be gone all day. "Hold down the fort," I told her. "I will, boss," she replied. She really was irreplaceable. I need to give her a raise, I said to myself. The trip was pleasant, and so was lunch. The other hostess made me feel welcome, and I felt like I had made a new friend. On the way back driving the Miata, I was really enjoying myself. The top was down, and the wind was fluttering my hair. I decided I would call another dealer and order myself a black one. I needed to live a little, and I wouldn't be needing another two-seater anytime soon. I pulled up to our driveway in a red sports car. Jenna looked out the window and must have said something to Carrie because they both came out to look at it. "Honey, why do you need that car? You know we need something with a back seat for Carrie." She said it condescendingly. "I just picked it up from Albuquerque for a client." Thought each of you might want to take her for a ride. I replied, No, honey, I don't like small cars, Jenna said with a note of disdain in her voice. Carrie, said I, indicating for my daughter to sit down. No, Daddy, I'm already uncomfortable being teased about my last name. I don't want to be seen in the company of a Polish used car salesman. She said it the way only a teenager can say it. I was, to say the least, stunned. Where did this disrespect come from? I looked at Jenna, and she was acting like Carrie had done nothing wrong. Great. Now both women in my house disrespect me. I know teenagers aren't supposed to be best buddies with their parents, but the way she said it offensively made me look at my whole family life as a sham. Well, I'm going for another drive. I'll be back any time, I said, putting the car in reverse and pulling away. I drove down the roads in and around Silver City, burning with anger. My marriage was rapidly deteriorating. When I finally pulled into the driveway at 9:30, I immediately went upstairs, hopped in the shower, and crawled into bed. When I didn't come down after my shower, Jenna came upstairs and into the room. The light from the hallway was shining directly into my eyes, and I squinted to cover them. Are you offended that we didn't get enthusiastic about the sports car? Aren't you going to go downstairs and spend time with your family? You're not only Polish, you're also a kid. Where did that attitude come from? One had to believe it came from George. She had spent time with him, and his reproachful attitude toward my heritage had been passed on to her. Now she was passing it on to her daughter. It was her daughter, not mine. I should probably get that into my head. I may have to support her, but she's not my daughter. It sounds like you and your daughter would prefer not to have a Polak around, so you can just back off. I was furious, and her attitude wasn't helping one bit. She's going to regret treating me like that. Needless to say, the Kaminsky house was quiet and cold from then on. The next day, I called Doug, and he came over to check out the Miata. He was thrilled. We talked numbers, and he was surprised that he got a great price. $3,000 less than Kelly Blue Book. As he was about to leave after filling out the paperwork, he said, My best friend is in charge of purchasing for the university, and we change 16 machines about every 2 years. I know that's not a lot, but could you please talk to him? Always happy to do business, and you know I'll make a deal with them, I said. I'll have Jim give you a call later this week. Thanks, I said. That's how I grew my business, by treating people right and letting them know I appreciated their recommendations. On Wednesday, I got a call from my attorney. Hi, Kurt. I think I have a solution to your potential problem. Would you mind stopping by this afternoon and discussing it with me? Sure, I can't wait to get started. The atmosphere around my house is becoming simply unbearable. At the meeting that afternoon, I listened to the plan and liked it. It would take about 2 weeks to implement, but if it worked, it would be worth it. During those 2 weeks, I quietly moved my personal belongings and tools out of the house and moved into an apartment in a neighboring town. Also, during those 2 weeks, George was anxiously waiting for those 24 cars to arrive to do some work that he could bill me for. When he asked, I just put it off. This past weekend, I did the yard, and when Jenna and Carrie weren't around, I tidied up the closet and dressers. Jenna did laundry during the week so she could do what she wanted to do on the weekends. This was good for me because she didn't notice my closet emptying. So I went back to that Monday night when I told Jenna, I'm out of here. She was rude to me again and disrespectful to both the Pole and the used car salesman. I backed it up by calling her a bitch. She hated that word. Then she exploded. And that's when I told her I was leaving. I usually went to a motel for a night or even 2, depending on how pissed off I was. Tuesday morning, after the explosion, I pulled into the parking lot early, and as my employees were coming in, I asked them to go into the conference room. I closed the door behind them. I had weekly meetings, so this was not unusual. I started the meeting. Good morning. As you all know, the cars I bought a couple weeks ago arrived yesterday afternoon. They have all been inspected and prepared, so they are now ready for sale. We won't be using George to do any more work. If he asks you, tell him we have decided to move in a different direction and leave it at that. You've all been wonderful, you're like family, so it's hard for me to accept what comes next. I paused and wiped a tear from my eye. I sold the business. They all looked at me with surprise in their eyes. However, as far as your job is concerned, nothing will change. Well, with the exception of Anna, you will take over some of my duties, and of course, you will get a corresponding raise in salary. Everyone, even in their surprised state, began to congratulate Anna. They all respected her and knew she deserved it. Anna, after the meeting, please come to me. We will discuss some points. I will still be involved, but only on a consulting basis, and I will probably sell occasionally. I don't want to take sales away from any of you. They were all glad that I would still be around, at least occasionally. The meeting ended, and as we walked out the door, George was standing there. Hey, why wasn't I included in the meeting? At most of the previous meetings, he had been included. I said, because this is an employee meeting and you're not an employee. He hesitated for a moment, then said, I see the cars have finally arrived. I'll start repairing them right away. No, they have already been thoroughly inspected and prepared for sale. Nothing needs to be done to them, said I sternly. He looked at me stunned. But I'm inspecting all your cars, Kurt. What's going on? George, I sold the business and the new owner wants to move in a different direction, I told him, not intending to make a big deal out of it. I'll save that for another day. I left it at that. I realized that sometimes it was better to say fewer words. I can't believe you sold the business, he exclaimed. What am I supposed to do now? Of course, it was all about himself. He had been told, in effect, that he was out of a job. Well, I said, you can collect your check for what you've done in the last 2 weeks. It wasn't much. Anna had only used his services a few times. He'd relaxed before delivering 23 cars thinking he'd be busy when they arrived. How wrong he was. I didn't feel sorry for him at all. I just wanted to tell him it was because he was a traitorous asshole. Meeting Anna, I asked her if she could keep our conversation private. Sure, Kurt. You know I would never say anything you wouldn't want me to, she assured me. Okay, here's the deal. I've set up companies that I've incorporated in Nevada. One of the companies is buying this parking lot, the other is buying another company. I am the sole owner of stock in both companies. At some point, I'm going to divorce Jenna and make sure she doesn't get that business. Why? She asked. I've moved out of my house. Jenna doesn't know about it yet, but I'm not going back. She's having an affair with George. Carrie isn't really my daughter. I believe she belongs to George. I don't even know if Jenna knows, let alone George. They'll find out soon enough. I won't seek a divorce, but I will continue to pay the utilities and taxes on our house. That way, she can't say I left her and take everything I own. Just in case she files for divorce because of irreconcilable differences, I don't want her to be able to take the business. That's why I've arranged for the company to be bought twice. Let them try to figure out what's going on. The proceeds from the sale will be used up by the time she goes through with the divorce. Besides, I'll make next to nothing on consulting and a few sales commissions. Anna, you're perfectly capable of running a day-to-day business. I'll be ready to call if you have any questions, but let me say that I trust you and rely on your judgment. The smile returned to her face when I told her about the new owner, but when she heard about Jenna and George, she had a look like she was ready to shoot someone. She was a woman I truly admired and respected. I continued. I have one more task for you, and then I will leave you. I need you to order new signage and letterhead. We are changing the name of the business. This will further cement in George and Jenna's minds that the business has been sold to someone else. The new name will be Graceful Auto. I spelled the name to make sure she understood it correctly. She looked at me with bewilderment. I said, someday I'll tell you why I chose that name. Suffice it to say, it tells the whole story. She still looked puzzled, but trusted me enough to follow my instructions. With those words, I left after saying a few words goodbye to everyone. I got into my car, an Audi, and drove down the road towards Albuquerque. I had been driving for about 2 hours when my cell phone rang. Judging by the caller ID, it was Jenna. I didn't expect her to call until this evening. It had happened so many times before when I was away. I'd go away for a day or two, she'd call, we'd talk, and I'd come back. Things would change for a while, and then we'd be back to the same old, same old. After a while, we would fight again, and the cycle would start all over again. I decided to answer the phone, expecting to hear what nonsense she would spout this time. Hey, I said through the speakerphone microphone. Kurt, what's going on? She asked somewhat hesitantly. Nothing, just on my way to Albuquerque. Why are you going there? She asked. To pick up my car. I said without emotion. So what I heard wasn't true, she said. And George had to call her. Figures, calling a mistress to find out what was going on with her husband. I don't know, I said. What did you hear? George called me and told me you sold the business. Why would he call you? I asked, stumping her. She corrected herself. He's your best friend. He was wondering if I knew what was going on. Best friend, what a joke. I was a buffoon to him, a stupid Paul, helpless and unaware of what was going on behind his back with his trashy wife. I told Jenna, I guess my family was embarrassed that I was a used car salesman, so yeah, I sold the business. Now you don't have to wear that stigma anymore. Shouldn't we have talked about this first? She said. I'm sure she was worried about how we were going to get on with our lives. It's my company. I owned it before I got married, and I can sell it whenever I want. I just hope the new owner treats my former employees well. So did you get a good price for her? Again, she was worried about how it would affect her standard of living. I wasn't worried about that. I just knew I needed to change jobs. I'll start looking after I take a few weeks off to relax. What about the mortgage? She asked. Oh, I used the proceeds to pay off the house. You don't have to worry about that. All we have to do now is pay the utilities and taxes. What about food? What about gasoline? What about insurance? She said almost hysterically. Oh, I guess I'm a stupid Polish girl. I didn't even think of them. Do you think you could have taken more hours at your job? Now she was excited. When are you coming home? There it was, the moment of truth. I'm not coming back, I said without thinking. What? I told you last night I was leaving. You told me not to come back, so I'm not coming back. Don't worry. I'll find a way to pay all the utilities so the lights won't be turned off. You can't do that, Kurt. You have to come back. I could hear the desperation in her voice. No, I really don't know, I replied in an impassive voice. Kurt, don't do this, she cried. I already did, I said. What about your daughter? She asked, trying to touch my heartstrings. You mean Carrie, the girl who's ashamed of her last name and the fact that her old man is or was selling used cars? Kurt, she's just acting like a 13-year-old girl. You can't take it personally. Well, it doesn't matter anymore. I'm not coming anymore, so neither of you will be embarrassed by me. With those words, I hung up and turned off the phone. Let her think about it. I knew she was trying to call me back now and would be annoyed that I wasn't picking up the phone. After the phone call, I calmed down and tried to enjoy the leisurely drive to Albuquerque. I could only assume that the next call she would make would be to her lover to get more information and let him know what I had said. Upon reaching my destination, I turned my phone back on and saw that I had 5 messages. I listened to them all. 3 from Jenna, 1 from George, and 1 from Anna. I immediately called Anna. Hi, Anna. I'm sorry. I turned my phone off. I've been getting some unwanted calls. Yes, I know. Your wife and George called me to see where you were. I told them you no longer own the house, so you're not stopping by anymore. I hope everything is all right. Great, I said. If they give you a lot of trouble, tell them you're calling the police about harassment over the phone. I like that, she said. Kurt, you may feel like you don't have any family or friends anymore, but trust me, you do. We are your family, and we always will be. Thank you, Anna. You knew just what to say. I hope your husband knows how lucky he is. Believe me, he knows. He tells me about it all the time. Don't ever lose that. Never take each other for granted. I'm not going to, she said. I hung up the phone and wondered if I should call the cheating wife or the asshole who set me up. No, let them handle it themselves. I got out of the Audi and walked into the car dealership's office. The owner was waiting for me there. I have the Audi I told you about. Would you like to see if we can do a trade-in? We'll see, he said. He was impressed with the condition of the car, inside and out and under the hood. He looked at me and said, I can sell it in a week. Are you sure you want to do a trade-in? I think I'll get a better deal. Sometime in the future, you can return the favor. I'm not here to make money. I'm here to buy a sports car. Half an hour later, I was back on the road, with the top down, enjoying the ride. Now we had to decide where to go. North sounded good, so I headed for Santa Fe. For the next 2 weeks, I traveled through northern New Mexico, Arizona, southern Utah, and Colorado. I wanted to be in the neighborhood in case Anna needed me to come back. I called her several times, and when it was clear she had it all worked out, I decided to head west. Of course, I kept getting calls. First, they were annoyed, then apologetic, and finally downright bitchy. I listened, but I didn't care. When I got the call that my credit card had been canceled, I just laughed. When George called and told me I was a horrible person for dumping Jenna and Carrie so easily, I had to laugh even harder. I got a call from my lawyer. Jenna called and threatened to file a child abandonment petition if I didn't contact her and call her back. I called him back. "Hey, it's Kurt. So you got a threatening call from my wife?" I said. "Yeah, but I wouldn't worry about it. If you're still paying for the house, she'll have a hard time proving it." "I can do better than that for you," I said. "I have a tape of me telling her I'm leaving and she asked me not to come back." "That's awesome. Send me a copy," he said. "If she gives me any trouble, I'll get her lawyer on it. Have her lawyer try to press her on it." I said, "Thanks. I'll call you in a week to see how things are going." I drove all over the Southwest. The Miata wasn't the most comfortable car, but it was fun. Lots of people looked at me, even glimpses of bored and horny middle-aged women. But I wasn't aiming for that. After all, I was still married, for that matter. I drove to Reno, then to Lake Tahoe, the coast, Napa Valley, and Highway 1, looping along the coastline. I stopped in Yosemite, then San Diego, through Death Valley, to Vegas, and then to Phoenix. I took my time. I stopped at parking lots, talked to the owners, and just chatted about this and that. Some of them were jealous that a guy in his early 30s could just pick up and take a road trip. After traveling for about 3 months and 8,000 miles, I decided to head back to Silver City. I stopped by Bezradny Auto and was greeted by my entire team. In fact, there were several new faces here. They all welcomed me back. When I walked into Anna's office, formerly my office, she looked up. When she saw me, her smile got even wider. She stood up, walked around her desk, and gave me a big hug. We talked for a while, and then I asked, "Do you think I could invite everyone over to Wrangler's to eat and drink? Can you close the store at 5 o'clock?" It was already 3 o'clock at that point, and I had a few errands to run. "Of course I'll insist on it. The whole team will be there." I said goodbye to them and told them I'd see them in 2 hours. They were in good spirits. I visited my lawyer, who had informed me earlier that Jenna had tried to disinherit me to get all my assets, but he had managed to thwart her attempts. We discussed what to do next. At 5 o'clock, I met the team at Wrangler's restaurant. We had a great dinner and were happy to chat with everyone. After about an hour and a half, they started going home. Finally, it was just me and Anna. She looked at me and said, "You know, Kurt, you may think you're helpless and vulnerable and don't understand anything, but you're wrong. You just trusted the ones you loved." I looked at her. "So you figured it out, huh?" "Yes, it took me a while, but you said the new name reveals the whole story. It kept me on my toes until I figured it out. You can be Polish, but all the jokes can never describe the real you. Jokes are an insult to you and your heritage." "Thank you, Anna. You really are the main reason I came back. I needed to see how you were handling my duties. I'm happy to say that not only did you not replace my shoes, but you made your own pair." "I had a great mentor," she said gratefully. We hugged and she went home to her husband. He was really happy. I went back to the apartment I hadn't been in for 3 months. It was musty and needed a good airing out. I opened the windows and let the cool evening air fill the rooms. I grabbed a beer and sat on the veranda overlooking the pool. There were a few people swimming and a family playing. Jenna and I had so many hopes and dreams when we got married. Now they were all gone. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was about 8:30. I thought, looks like it's time for a showdown. I got up, got in my Miata, and drove to my house. I guess technically it was still mine. I had bought it before Jenna and I were married, and the title deed had only my name on it. When I pulled into the driveway, I was disappointed. The yard wasn't well maintained. It looked like the landscaping hadn't even been touched. There was a light on in the house, so I figured Jenna was home. I walked to the door and knocked. A minute later, the door opened and Carrie appeared on the doorstep. Her eyes got big and she asked, "Daddy?" "Hey, Carrie, is your mom home?" She hissed and then shouted, "Mommy!" I heard Jenna yell from the kitchen in a strained, shrill voice, "What the hell is that?" She kept looking at me and said loudly back, "Daddy." And then Jenna came out from around the corner, saw me, and screamed, "Where the hell are you?" I decided to answer her scream in a calm, even voice, "Traveling." At that moment, George came out of the bedroom wearing only boxers. "Oh," I said, "the whole family is here. Mom, Dad, and the baby." "What the hell are you talking about?" Jenna shouted back. "I guess George moved in to take my place after all. It's his by right." And Jenna looked at me with a puzzled expression on her face. Carrie replied, "He lost his apartment after you fired him and Mom needed a man to help pay the bills and do other things since you just left." You could feel the rage in her voice. "Well, young lady, it seems you were misinformed." She hated it when I corrected her. George was never an employee of mine, and at his insistence, I couldn't fire him. As for the bills, all the utilities are paid, as is the insurance on the car. "What about groceries and gas in the car?" Jenna shrieked. "You had a job. Did you lose it? I know it was just your crazy money before, but it was enough for groceries and gas while I was gone." "Nah. So you think you're going to come back and move in with us right away?" she asked. "No, I'll wait until you and your lover find a place to live." It was obvious that they were sleeping together in my house, and Carrie seemed fine with that. "I'm not moving out of my house," Jenna said. "Correction, it's my house. I owned it before we got married and only my name is on the deed." I replied, "Well, you left, now it's mine." "The law doesn't work that way. Since I paid the utilities and taxes, I am still the legal owner, and even if I was gone for a short period of time, it still belongs to me. Don't worry, I'll give you lovebirds until the end of next month to find your own place. Just don't forget to take your daughter with you." "What do you mean, your daughter? She is our daughter." "Truer words cannot be spoken," I said with a smirk on my face. Jenna looked puzzled. I then turned to Carrie. "Carrie, I know you hate being called Polish, so I have good news for you. I'm not your real father, I'm George's father." The silence in the room was deafening. After a moment, Jenna meekly asked, "What?" "Yes, Jenna, it seems that as a result of your little indiscretion on your wedding day, you had a baby, just not mine. But you have good news, Carrie. You can now take your real daddy's last name and become Carrie Carey." I wonder if maybe Mom didn't insist on the name Carrie in memory of her lover. I looked at Jenna, and she looked at George. He was white as a ghost. "What, George, you don't want to be a dad? Well, that's too bad. Take the responsibility. Look on the bright side, after all. It's only 4 more years and then college," Jenna and George said almost in unison. "I don't believe it." I tossed them the DNA report. "See for yourself." They grabbed it, looked at it, and then both fainted. "Carrie, tell the lovebirds that your mom will be served with divorce papers sometime next week along with the eviction notice." I turned and walked away. The whole time I was gone, I pondered whether the affair had continued throughout the marriage. Moreover, I questioned whether she had been faithful to me at all. We met when she came to buy a car. George was working on the car, and we both decided she would be a great choice for a date. Did she choose me or not? I really was joyless, clueless, helpless, vulnerable. Then George had been laughing at me behind my back the whole time, as well as making Polish jokes in my face. I went back to the apartment and got a beer or 4 mugs. In the morning, I went to my lawyer and asked him to start the paperwork. Sure, I knew I'd have to sell the house and split the proceeds, but as a barely working man, I wouldn't have to pay alimony or child support, especially since another man had already taken my place. At least that's what I hoped. I loved Jenna, and I loved George too. The betrayal was unbelievable. I won't be able to trust anyone, male or female, for a long time yet. Maybe I should see a therapist. As the divorce proceedings dragged on, I went back to work at the car dealership, but as a salesman. I made it clear to all the employees that I was no longer the boss and that I only needed 1 sale a week to pay rent and buy groceries. In fact, I insisted that there was only one. When it came to court-ordered child support, I wanted to have no money left at the end of the month other than my own meager living expenses. Jenna hired an attorney. I don't know how she could afford it. Maybe he was doing it pro bono. He'd be surprised. They checked my bank accounts and saw that I had spent the funds from the sale and even checked the transaction itself, but found nothing wrong with it. They didn't dig deep enough. I learned from my fellow sellers that while I was away, George had talked to Anna almost every day for the first 2 weeks about wanting some kind of job. She had no problem telling him no every time. Eventually, he gave in. Now he wished he had never gotten his ASE certification because the only job he could find was at Valvoline Quick Oil Change, where he was making $13 an hour. I hoped Jenna had moved on to a full-time job or they would have a hard time making ends meet. I contacted a realtor and informed Jenna that I was putting the house up for sale to split all of our assets 50-50ths. She had already been served with an eviction notice, so she had to move out before the house was sold and closed. One night, there was a knock on my door. It was Jenna, of course. I opened the door, looked at her, and asked, "What do you need?" "Kurt, can we talk?" "I don't think that's a good idea. We're suing each other." "Come on, Kurt, it's just me here, no lawyers. Can't we sit down and have a polite conversation?" "Yeah, I guess so, but let's go to Denny's," I said. So there are witnesses, I thought to myself. I didn't trust her enough to be alone with her. We were sitting in a booth at Denny's restaurant, and after a couple minutes of pleasantries, I asked, "Why, Jenna?" She looked at me, hesitated, and said, "I think the answer is simple. I liked both of you, and I couldn't make up my mind." "So you were dating both of us at the same time?" She lowered her gaze to the table and replied, "Yes, but George asked me not to tell you anything because he knew it would ruin your personal and working relationship with him. When I asked you to marry me, why did you say yes?" "Because I loved you." "What about George?" I asked. "I loved him too, but I knew he would never be a husband. When you asked me, he and I discussed it and ended our relationship. I wanted to focus on us and getting ready for the wedding. And on our wedding day, when you let him have sex, you said, 'I'm marrying him, but you're still my man.'" She started crying. "That's not what it was." "So what was it, Jenna?" She hesitated, then said, "I didn't want to lose him and he didn't want to lose me." "Well, now you have each other and your baby. By the way, you did a great job coming up with a name for her. I didn't even memorize it until I had time to think about it during my 3 months on the road. I didn't know Carrie wasn't yours, I really didn't." Then she looked at me and said, "Kurt, I wanted to talk to you tonight to tell you that I still love you." "I'm glad to hear you say that, Jenna, but I don't think you know what love is. I loved you more than anything, but you obviously can't say the same. I loved you, but I can honestly say I don't love you anymore. I loved you with all my heart, but now I feel nothing but contempt for you." When I said that, she looked up at me and realized that our relationship was over. There would never be an us again. I had to ask her one more question. "Have you ever stopped?" She hesitated, then apparently decided it didn't matter and told the truth. "We've never actually stopped. We had lulls, but we got together, usually twice a month." I was hoping for a different answer, but either way, I was glad she told me the truth. "One more question. What happened about a year ago that made you treat me so badly? Your whole attitude started to change. The outward disregard became obvious." Her face flushed, and then she got a little angry. "George started talking me into a threesome, but not with you. I probably would have agreed if you were involved, but we couldn't find a way to do it. He kept insisting on it, and it made me resent you for something I know you would never do. I know it sounds strange, but I thought I could make my two men love me together, and resented you for not being the man to allow it." "So have you ever done it?" I asked. "No, I thought about it, but then you left and my whole world came crashing down." "Well, now you can do it, knowing I don't care. What you do, I don't care anymore." We both knew the time for talking was at an end, so I paid the bill and we went to our cars. 4 months later, we appeared before a judge and he declared us divorced. George was there too. As we were leaving the courthouse, Jenna said, "How about an old-fashioned drink?" By this time, the animosity I had harbored toward the two of them was gone. Then I thought, this will be the last time I have to be with them. From now on, they can be alone together. Let those pigs live in their own filth. They deserve each other, and Jenna will have to get used to a lower standard of living. Okay, maybe the hostility hadn't gone away. We drove to the Wrangler, and as we started walking in from the parking lot, I thought, this sounds like a lot of anecdotes. This one started like this. A crooked-footed bitch, a conniving asshole, and a Polish guy walk into the bar. The bartender yells as we walk through the door, "Hey, we don't serve the likes of you here." The trashy asshole and the asshole look at each other. Then the asshole says, "Hey, you can't refuse service just because he's Polish." The bartender says, "The Pole can stay, but the health department won't let us keep bitches and assholes in plain sight in a food service establishment." That was Gus. I offered him a hell of a deal on a classic car someone had turned in. He's been treating me like royalty ever since. He adores his 1972 Gran Torino and treats it like a child, cleaning and polishing it from the front chrome to the taillights. I may be Polish, but I am a respectable man. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.